They called the People's Republic of Albania the most isolated country in Europe. Throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, this small communist country remarkably managed to join with, and then split with, 3 different major communist powers. After its third and final split, Albania ferociously pursued economic self-reliance, and it made them the 3rd poorest country in the world. What does it really mean to be self-reliant? Let the Albanians tell you. In this video, we look at the rise and fall of communist Albania. This video is brought to you by the Asianometry Patreon. Early access members get to see new videos first, as well as selected references for those videos. Early access really helps a lot, and I appreciate every pledge. Thanks, and on with the show. Albania is a small country in southeast Europe. Taiwan is about 25% larger. It is near the Mediterranean Sea and bordered by Montenegro, Kosovo, Greece, and North Macedonia. Today, about 2.8 million people live there, making it about as populous as Taipei City. The capital and largest city is Tirana. Albania is known for its beautiful landscapes. 20% of the country is covered in forest, and many rivers flow through it, draining into stunning lakes. There are also several massive mountain ranges like the Albanian Alps. The mountainous, swampy, and forest-laden terrain make it difficult to find arable land. There are also some very bewitching natural parks, like the Theth National Park in the aforementioned Albanian Alps. These lands are largely untouched, with striking rock faces, valleys, and waterfalls. Thank you for watching my hastily made Albanian tourism video. This is the first time I've mentioned Albania, so we will need some background. I'm not going to get into everything, and I apologize in advance for that. The goal is to get what we need to move forward. Throughout its history, the lands of what we now call Albania have felt the influence of foreign powers. We shall start with the Ottoman Turks. The Ottomans first invaded these lands in 1388, but were then driven out by the feudal lord, military genius, and Albanian hero Skenderbo. He held out against the superior Ottoman forces, winning the admiration of many in Europe. But then he died, as humans unfortunately tend to do, and by the late 1500s, the Ottomans occupied the lands once more, ruling them for another 400 or so years. Under their influence, much of what had been a Christian population converted to Islam. In 1912, the newly established country of Albania was a feudal society of about 1 million people. The country's lands had rich natural resources like oil, but those were very undeveloped. The average national income in 1927 was $40, and the economy was dominated by large, absent landowners. Lacking influence, the country was torn between 2 major powers. In April 1915, the UK, France, and Russia made a secret treaty with Italy. If Italy entered the war, then they would receive territories including those of Albania's. Italy's influence would last for years, though they contributed little to the country's economic development other than to start production on some oil fields. Taking advantage of the interwar chaos, one of Albania's large landowners, Ahmed Zogu, became prime minister with Yugoslav backing. But Zogu quickly soured on the Yugoslavs and sidled up to fascist Italy. Then in 1928, Zogu declared himself king of the Albanians. The newly crowned King Zog I clashed with the Italians, refusing their demands to more closely integrate their economies and admit settlers. He added a British officer presence to counterweight Italian army influence. But King Zog I could not improve the economy. Albania's economy was dependent mostly on natural resources like oil from the Kukova oil field. They also exported cheese, animal skins, eggs, and livestock. When the world fell into an economic depression in the 1930s, the Albanian economy fell under deeper influence of the Italians. In March 1938, the Germans invaded and annexed Austria. A few months later, they annexed Czechoslovakia. Italy felt like they needed to get in on the annexing game too, and with King Zog I recently welcoming the birth of his first son, an heir to the throne, they had to make their move. So on April 7, 1939, Italy invaded. The Albanian army posed them no threat. The former king fled, and Victor Emmanuel III took the Albanian crown. But the Albanian people resented the Italian occupation and organized a resistance split into 2 significant groups. The first was the National Front, or the nationalists led by Midhat Frashiri. They were a disparate group of landowners who rejected communism and sought to restore Albania's geographical integrity. They somewhat leaned towards the West. The other large group was the Communist Party of Albania, or officially the Albanian Party of Labor. It was created in 1941 when the Communist Party of Yugoslavia sent one of their members to unify the small scattered parties there. This party was led by a man named Enver Hoxha. Enver Hoxha was the son of a Muslim clothing merchant and grew up in an ordinary family. He was a hard-working student without any obvious talents. Nevertheless, his uncle, a guy with great ambition, got him admitted into a prestigious high school in the city of Korça, the Albanian National Lyceum. Hoxha was an average student, but showed a talent for politics and a desire for power. He was also easily underestimated, which contributed to his future. After graduation, he went to France for university but did not complete his studies. After some time in Brussels, he returned to Albania and worked as a teacher. At some point before then, it's not clear when, he became a communist. Hoxha was present at the founding of the Communist Party of Albania. As I said, the Yugoslav communists had called a meeting to build unity, but the various group leaders refused to accept a single leader. So they set up a central committee with the goal of running a collective leadership model. Hoxha was selected and he quickly dominated the committee. Eventually, the rest of his peers on the committee would all be either jailed or executed. Albania remains the only country in Central or Eastern Europe to have been, quote, liberated without any Allied help. Per the advice of the Yugoslavs, the Communist Party of Albania ditched the economic messaging of Marxist-Leninism and instead preached national liberation. Thus, they formed the National Liberation Movement with their allies. They launched guerrilla attacks against the Italians, unafraid of violent reprisals. In fact, they hoped that the Italians would hit back and radicalize more people to fuel their own ranks. Then in August 1943, with Italy ailing, the nationalists and the communists signed the secret Mukti agreement to join together. Unfortunately, the agreement quickly fell apart due to differences over whether to fight for an ethnic Albanian country. The nationalist policy had been to have all the Albanian ethnic peoples under a single state. Such a state would have included Kosovo, which was then part of Yugoslavia through Serbia. The Albanian communists, then backed by Yugoslavia, obviously found this unacceptable. The differences spiraled into violence, the communists attacking the nationalists. So the nationalists allied with Germany. In September 1943, the Germans sent paratroopers occupying the country. This discredited the nationalists and ended their influence in the eyes of the Albanian people. After this difficult setback, the communists returned with ferocity and in November 1944 marched into the capital city, winning the war. The fighting had been bloody. Over 28,000 Albanians out of a population of just 1 million perished. In a speech at the Paris Peace Conference in 1946, Hoxha adds, "Of the 2,500 towns and villages of Albania, 850 were ruined or razed to the ground. All the communications, all the ports, mines, and electric power installations were destroyed. Our agriculture and livestock were plundered, and our entire national economy was wrecked." Very quickly, Hoxha moved his new provisional government to action. Not to rebuild from the horrors of war, mind you, but to purge its opponents. Koçi Xhoxha, the Minister of the Interior, led a purge that brutally targeted elites, anti-communists from the interwar years, and all other enemies of the people. People were convicted in sham tribunals without due process, and nearly 2,000 were executed. Others were sent to one of 39 newly built jails, often in remote areas. There, they were fed scraps and forced to work in the mines. The party set up a secret police, the Directorate of State Security. Like the Stasi of East Germany, they had over 200,000 workers at their peak, keeping millions of files on people. On April 1945, Yugoslavia recognized Hoxha's provisional government as Albania's legal government. Later that year, the Soviet Union did the same. In December 1945, Albania held free elections, and the communists, who were the only candidates, won with 90% of the vote. A month later, Hoxha abolished the monarchy and declared the country to be a people's republic. As I mentioned, the Communist Party of Yugoslavia helped found the Communist Party of Albania, gave military assistance, and sponsored the People's Republic as a government. But of course, such things don't come free. In return, Yugoslavia pushed Albania towards joining the Yugoslav Federation, which included, among others, Slovenia, Serbia, Croatia, and so on. Such a federation would be led by the then Prime Minister Josip Tito, who styled himself as the Great Liberator of the Balkans and Europe. Yugoslavia and Albania signed close technical and economic agreements, coordinating their monetary systems and education. They sent over grain to stave off food shortages. Joint ventures were formed to exploit Albanian natural resources. In this arrangement, Albania supplied natural resources to Yugoslavia, who produced industrial goods to sell back to Albania at inflated prices. How was this different from the Italians? But at first, Hoxha was helpless to stop it. In June 1947, the Yugoslavs began publicly attacking Hoxha for his supposed anti-Marxist views, in a plan to eventually replace him with his Minister of Interior, Hoxha. In early 1948, Stalin apparently told Milovan Dejilas of the Communist Party of Yugoslavia that they had no special interest in Albania and agreed that Yugoslavia should, quote, swallow it, provided that it be done at the right time. Was Stalin being sincere? Who knows? It's Stalin. But at some point, Yugoslavia's determination to acquire Albania, combined with moves in Greece, turned Stalin against Tito. Stalin sent a series of letters to Tito, publicly criticizing his policies. Upon receiving the first letter in mid-April 1948, Hoxha took advantage. In a secret meeting, the Soviets guaranteed that they would not allow a Yugoslav attack on Albania and granted him free hand to purge the party of pro-Yugoslav influence. Stalin's intervention saved Hoxha's butt. In November 1948, Hoxha, once the number 2 in the regime, and his cronies were abruptly stripped of their titles. Hoxha was arrested, dragged out of his house next door to Hoxha's, and put on trial. Hoxha, who himself previously oversaw many sham trials, was swiftly condemned to death in one of his own in 1949. His last wish was that his family be spared persecution and his son allowed to pursue his education. The government did neither, and the liquidations, as they are called, would continue throughout Hoxha's 46-year rule. 5,037 men and 450 women were executed under his tenure. After 1948, Albania severed their ties with Yugoslavia and joined Comecon, entering the Soviet orbit. From 1949 to 1951, all of Albania's trade was with Comecon states. The Soviet Union by itself made up half of that. The Soviets sent food and military aid to the Albanians, about $200 million worth in total between 1948 and 1960. They transferred technologies and also built several airfields, including even a submarine base. Completed in 1952, this submarine base, located on Sazan Island on the Adriatic Sea, was a major thorn in the side for the American Sixth Fleet. Today, it serves as a training ground for the British Royal Navy and NATO forces. Hoxha must be spinning in his grave. The Albanians, for their part, considered their Soviet association to be an upgrade in prestige. In his later years, Hoxha showed an immense personal admiration of Stalin, even publishing a book about their meetings. In it, Hoxha recalls Stalin being very warm and kind to him during their 5 meetings. The Soviet leader makes casual coffee shop small talk, asking Hoxha about Albanian history, their customs, and the landscape. Stuff that any member of his staff could have put together in an hour. In one exchange, Stalin asks Hoxha if he eats pork. Hoxha replies that he does. Stalin then advises that Hoxha tackle questions of religious faith with care, without hurting the feelings of the people. Stalin also tells Hoxha not to punish his own party members too harshly, advises against open hostility against the United States and the United Kingdom, and laughingly tells Hoxha to preserve life and pursue diplomacy. We don't have records from the Soviet side about these meetings. so it's hard to corroborate this admittedly strange depiction of Stalin. Whether or not Hoxha's personal feelings were real, he was genuine in his fervor for a Stalinist economy. Going Stalinist means building a completely centrally planned socialist economy. The government would decide on all the aspects of economic decision-making laid out in grand 5-year plans. Policy emphasizes the collectivization of agriculture and the rapid buildup of heavy industry at the cost of consumer products. Collectivization came more slowly since Albania did not have that much arable land. But by 1956, there were 696 collective farms, having 40% of the land. Though those farms had trouble finding labor, party officials wrote of having to exert greater force to get workers to work. In 1951, the Albanian government completed their transition to a centrally planned economy with their first 5-year plan. This plan set all prices, production levels, investment, and wages in the economy. As you might expect, this Stalinist-style Albanian economy created strange contradictions and shortages. Employment was guaranteed, but people could not choose their job. If you didn't achieve your job's goals, then you went to the labor camps. The government built massive new textile factories, like the Stalin Textile Complex. New stores were stocked with clogs, coats, and luxury bags. But there was no food. The newspapers declared that all the quotas were being met, but the people ate less meat in 1953 than they did in 1949, and food rationing continued until 1957. In 1953, Stalin died. In grief, Enver Hoxha filled Tirana's largest square with thousands of people and made them kneel to take an eternal oath to their beloved father and great liberator. Watched by the secret police, Albanians rubbed their children's eyes with onions to show the proper amount of emotion and grief. But Stalin's death ushered in Nikita Khrushchev, whose new policies grated with Hoxha. For instance, Khrushchev's repudiation of the Stalin cult of personality and instituting a model of collective leadership, or his policy of different paths to socialism, topped off with a June 1956 reconciliation with Marshal Tito. As early as October 1954, Albania started moving towards the other major communist power, beefing with Khrushchev, the People's Republic of China. Then, in September 1956, Hoxha led a high-ranking delegation to meet with Mao Zedong. After that, the Chinese began issuing more aid to the Albanians, growing to 21.6% of the total trade balance in 1957. As the Sino-Soviet split widened throughout the 1950s, Albania's own break with the Soviets and closeness to China became untenable. It all boiled over in November 1960 when Hoxha criticized Khrushchev in Moscow. Khrushchev and Hoxha met 4 times that month, resolving nothing. A few months later, at the Albanian Communist Party Congress in February 1961, Hoxha launched an economic campaign against Soviet advice, pledging loyalty only on his own terms. It was the last time the Soviets would attend a party congress in Albania. They were quite poorly treated there. Infuriated by the arrogance of this tiny country, they, in April 1961, withdrew their considerable aid, which made up 50% of Albania's economy from 1946 to 1961. That October 1961, at the Soviet Communist Party Congress in Moscow, Khrushchev called Hoxha an unreconstructed Stalinist. Zhou Enlai, who was present, tried to smooth things out behind the scenes, but Khrushchev and his cohorts pressed on. The Soviets insisted on airing all the dirty laundry, blaming the Albanians for spurning all previous attempts at reconciliation. In a portion of a speech, Khrushchev accused Hoxha and the Albanian police of sabotaging the Soviet-Albanian relationship. He bluntly and correctly stated that Hoxha did not want to extinguish the cult of personality because it means giving up their own personal power. They apparently expect in this manner to clear the ground for winning the right to receive handouts from the imperialists. The imperialists are always prepared to pay 30 pieces of silver to those who split the communist ranks. But pieces of silver have never brought anyone anything except dishonor and shame. The next day, TASS issued an official statement with the very serious line, "Now it is no longer a secret that the Albanian leaders rule through arbitrary power and violence." Stunned, the Albanians fired back, calling Khrushchev a revisionist and an anti-Marxist, questioning his authority to speak for the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Then, on November 1961, Hoxha gave a fiery speech of his own back home in Albania. In it, he called Khrushchev a revisionist. "Our people have a saying, 'The fish rots from its head.' That's what happened in the Soviet Union. Revisionism emerged in its head and spread throughout its whole body." Hoxha also called Khrushchev defeatist for his policy of peaceful coexistence, as well as for backing down on the Berlin issue. And of course, Hoxha denounced de-Stalinization again, calling Stalin a true follower of Lenin, having never compromised in his pursuit of Marxist-Leninism. And in response to Khrushchev's barb about pieces of silver, Hoxha made one of his most famous comments. "The Albanian people and their party of labor will even live on grass if need be, but they will never sell themselves for 30 pieces of silver." In response, the Soviet Union and their aligned states expelled Albania from the Warsaw Pact and Comecon, leaving China as their only significant ally. Khrushchev summed up his whole feelings on the matter with his earlier remarks to the Chinese. "It is true that we lost Albania, but what you've won is nothing much." China attempted to replace Soviet aid to Albania, sending their own technicians and advisors, and the Albanians received them favorably. The Chinese were less strict about loan interest and repayment, and their workers took the same salaries as average Albanians. China, then also isolated, considered Albania one of its staunch allies. In November 1966, Mao Zedong called Albania the only beacon of true socialism left in Europe and promised, "An attack on Albania will have to reckon with the great peoples of China. If the US imperialists, the modern Soviet revisionists, or any of their lackeys dare to touch Albania in the slightest, nothing lies ahead for them but a complete, shameful, and memorable defeat." But the People's Republic of China was themselves a developing country, struggling through one of the worst famines in history. Moreover, China is geographically quite far away from Albania, which caused delays. Once it took a year and a half to deliver machinery for a textile plant. Thus, Chinese aid struggled to replace what was lost from the Soviets, making the time of the Third Five-Year Plan, 1961 to 1965, some of the most challenging in communist Albania's history. In order to maintain his grip on power, Hoxha tightened his surveillance state apparatus. He also ramped up his own cult of personality. Every photograph of him was scrutinized with him immaculately combed and smiling. As you might expect, the Chinese love affair did not last for very long. In 1969, China began making its famous, world-changing overtures to the West. This started to drive a wedge between itself and Albania, which valued its position as China's only quote-unquote real ally. When the US President Nixon announced his trip to China in July 1971, the news fell upon the Albanians like a bombshell. At the same time, the Chinese apparently told the Albanians behind the scenes that they should not expect aid to continue indefinitely. In response, Hoxha and the Albanian party sent a formal message, calling Nixon a frenzied anti-communist, and any meeting with him would be revisionist. In 1976, he purged high-ranking members of his army and party for pro-Chinese leanings. Mao died that same year. Then in 1977, the hated Tito was invited to Beijing for a meeting. Albania considered this an embarrassing loss of face and ramped up their rhetorical attacks on China, calling them a collaborator and no different from the Soviet Union or Yugoslavia. Deng Xiaoping is not the type to mess around. In July 1978, the People's Republic of China announced that it would cut off all aid to Albania, then worth half of the country's economy. When the shortages intensified in the mid-1960s, The party increasingly focused on the concept of self-reliance. Self-reliance is a fundamental concept in Stalinist economies, and the Soviet Union itself practiced it in its early years. But Albania's unique situation caused it to push this particular value above all others. After the severing of ties with China, the Albanian government told its people that they were special, and that the imperialist foreign powers were trying to exploit them, economic blockades, and encirclement. And so Hoxha will cut them off. He declared his country as the only one left in the world still building socialism, revamping the constitution in 1976 to enshrine the principle of self-reliance. For the next 12 years, the country would go it alone. No foreign aid or credit, nor can Albanian companies do joint ventures with foreign countries. Hoxha would receive unlimited power in pursuit of these goals. His cult of personality ramped to even higher levels, calling him the father of the nation, a second Skanderbo. Religion was banned and people were forbidden from traveling abroad. Implementing this policy had several notable points of emphasis. First, Albania ramped up their exports to acquire hard currency to buy needed investment goods from abroad. Their economy is largely based on four major goods: oil, chrome ore or chromite, copper, and electricity. To sell these goods, Albania diversified its roster of trade partners, including a semi-relaxation of relations with Yugoslavia and Comecon, excluding the Soviet Union. Second, the country locked down on all available economic data. The Central Committee still received data. If it was good, then they released it. Otherwise, it was carefully controlled as a state secret. Third, the country needed to be self-sufficient in food production. The Albanians drained the swamps to expand the arable land area, going from 391,000 hectares in 1950 to 713,000 in 1985. In 1976, Albania declared that it had achieved self-sufficiency in bread grain, perhaps the policy's greatest achievement if statistics are to be believed. All of this took place near the end of Hoxha's life. Hoxha was a longtime smoker and a diabetic. In 1972 and 1973, he suffered a pair of heart attacks, which caused him to dial back some of his political activities. In 1980, he chose Ramiz Alia as his successor, purging and possibly executing his own longtime partner, the Prime Minister Mehmed Shehu, in doing so. Over the next 2 years, Alia gained more decision-making power as Hoxha receded into a lonely semi-retirement, largely towing the party line of Hoxha's self-enforced economic isolation. In 1983, an aged and frail Hoxha declared victory. We have entered the third year of the seventh five-year plan. The results achieved during the first 2 years regarding the increase of the social product and national income are among the greatest ever achieved in the last decade. Hoxha spent the rest of his years in a gilded cage. He wrote 13 fanciful memoirs talking up his achievements and romanticizing his youthful years, and took walks with his grandchildren, in total ignorance of the economic disaster developing around him. In his last years, he was barely there, mostly sitting with his head down. In April 1985, he collapsed into a coma and died soon after without saying a word. The party's grip on power would not survive much longer. At first, the economic numbers seemed to back Hoxha's declaration. In 1983, the CIA World Factbook reported that Albania had exported about $10 million more than it imported. The state budget also showed a slight surplus, and the country had no foreign debt at all, which was unique for Eastern Europe. It was right about that time, though, that the country fell into a deep and prolonged economic stagnation. We have little data on this period, but what we do have is rough. Throughout the 1980s, Albania's economy grew at an average of 1.7%, zeroed out during the second half of the decade. The country's annual population growth rate throughout this same period was 2%, so the average Albanian got poorer throughout the decade. The immediate cause for this was a large drought that lasted 5 years from 1983 to 1988, afflicting the country's agricultural output and hydropower generation. Albania needed the electricity not only for export, but also for chromite mining. So the drought was a triple whammy. At the same time, there was a massive oil glut in the world that crashed petrol prices and hurt one of the country's other major economic pillars, oil. Oil production numbers most demonstrated Albania's backwardness. The 5-year plan called for the extraction of 3 million tons of oil in 1985. The likely actual number was 1.2 million. The equipment from the Soviets and Chinese was already obsolete. Now it is also broken. Per Self-Reliance, engineers tried to rebuild the machinery on their own, spending far more than it would have cost than to simply buy new stuff from abroad. The people suffered. A family, no matter the size, was rationed 1 kilogram of meat, 250 grams of butter, and 7 eggs each week. The average monthly wage in 1984 was $15, and people could not even keep their own cows, sheep, or chickens. Even in the capital city of Tirana, the richest city in the country, water and electricity were only available for a few hours each day. 4 to 10 people at a time lived in a single 50 square meter flat. The son of one of the first Western politicians from Germany to visit in 1984 recalled, "At night, the town was in total darkness. There were no cars. We saw only a few trucks, most of them broken down. Some people were trying to repair them. The roads were in a sorry state. We went to a place where they had an exhibition of Albanian technology. When we entered, we saw an Enver Hoxha tractor. Our friend from Mercedes-Benz had a look at it and said, yes, we used to make these back in 1920. The technology on display there was indeed from the 1920s. Anyone who tried to leave was shot on sight. Jamming devices were installed at the borders to prevent foreign influence, and the border itself was laced with barbed wire, and 64% of the coasts were designated as military zones. In 45 years, some 1,200 people were killed trying to escape the country, almost all of whom were under 30 years old." Self-reliance in Albania had only caused economic stagnation and decay, and even the party can see it. Thus, after Hoxha's death, Aliyah sought to introduce gradual change to the economy, slowly backing away from the self-reliance philosophy. In 1986, he made quiet outreaches to the West, establishing diplomatic relations with West Germany, Spain, and Canada. He reduced the number of offenses deserving the death penalty and relaxed travel restrictions. But that was not enough. Small reforms lead to a call for more. The vaunted secret police had started to lose its grip over the people, and by 1989, the communist governments of Eastern Europe had started to wobble and collapse. On July 1990, thousands of people occupied Western embassies and refused to leave. Many braved crossing the mountains into Greece, Montenegro, and Italy, though many were returned. Massive protests erupted in the capital city. Law and order broke down and violence broke out on the streets. Hundreds of schools, hospitals, and collective farms were looted, causing further damage to the economy. Industrial output in the third quarter 1991 was 60% lower than in the previous year. Aliyah made a weak final attempt to hold on to power with more reforms. These failed, and Aliyah, to his infinite credit, and I really mean that, did not shoot the protesters and instead called for free elections. The people tore down Hoxha's statues and demanded his name be erased from the buildings and universities. And in March 1992, the Democratic Party won power. Albania's struggle for self-reliance in a globalized world tells a tale. The country was blessed with natural resources and a strategic position between East and West. They really could have played both sides and gotten the best out of it. But multiple times, they turned away from all of that, finally descending into a fanciful pursuit of total economic self-reliance that led the country down a pathway of anti-development and into madness. After 1992, Albania underwent one of the fastest transitions to capitalism, but today there remains still a profound need for more economic reform. Alright everyone, that's it for tonight. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time.